Welcome back to Kunzy Podcast English, where every story doesn't just teach you English, it helps you understand life on a deeper level. Today, I want to share with you the story of a 20-year-old boy named Lin, a boy who grew up with nothing, someone no one believed would ever make it. But one night, something happened that made an entire town fall silent in front of his tiny bakery. What changed? How did a poor boy move an entire community to tears? And why did hundreds of people line up just to buy a simple loaf of bread? Stay with me until the end, because this story will touch your heart and change the way you look at effort, pain, and purpose. Let's begin. If someone ever passed through the small village tucked quietly in the peaceful countryside, they would probably never notice a skinny boy, tall and lanky, often barefoot, always carrying an old cloth bag at his side. That boy's name was Lin, just turned 20. Each day of Lin's life passed by like an old habit. Early in the morning helping his grandmother light the fire, at noon working in the fields, in the evening wandering around to help neighbors. No one knew what Lin was really thinking behind those quiet eyes, and no one asked. In this village, people only needed enough food to eat and a warm roof over their heads. As for dreams, well, they were a luxury. But Lin was different. Beneath that calm exterior was a boy constantly haunted by one question. Was I born just to live like this for the rest of my life? On certain late nights, when the whole village was sound asleep, Lin would sit alone by the window, staring at the sky full of stars. He didn't know why he always felt lost. Even when he was in the very house that had raised him, it felt like there was something out there, far away, waiting for him, but no one had ever shown him the way. Grandma Rose, the elderly woman who had raised Lin since he was small, was the only one who ever saw the restlessness in his eyes. Once, while Lin was absent-mindedly watching a flock of birds cross the sky, she gently asked, "What do you see up there, my child?" "I see freedom," he said. "I see those birds not being tied down. They can go wherever they want. But me, I just wander around here." She didn't answer right away. She simply lifted the kettle boiling on the stove, slowly poured out 2 cups of hot tea, and placed one in front of Lin. "My dear, not every bird is born free to fly right away. Some birds have to peck at bugs when they're still young. They have to learn how to flap their wings, how to avoid storms, how to find their way through the fog. They have to lose a few feathers, fall to the ground a few times, before they can truly fly." Lin looked at his grandmother, and a flicker of something lit up in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel sad about still being in the village. He felt like he was getting ready. During that time, Lin began trying to make cakes. No one taught him. He learned by observing, picking up bits of conversation villagers had while cooking, secretly watching videos on an old phone borrowed from the neighbor's kid. At first, the cakes were burnt and misshapen, but the more he baked, the more skillful Lin's hands became. He started to find joy in those quiet moments of kneading dough, when everything else faded away, just his breath and the steady beat of his heart sinking with each movement. One day, Lin decided to bring his cakes to the village market to try selling them. People looked at him with a half-smiling, half-pitying gaze. "That's Lin, Granny Rose's grandson? Making cakes, really? Oh dear. This boy sure is hard-working. But who would buy what he makes?" That laughter, if it had been before, might have hurt him, but this time was different. Lin simply bowed his head, smiled, and kept offering his cakes, one person at a time. One person tried them, then 2. Then a few curious children came by to ask for peace. Gradually, people no longer called Lin that good-for-nothing boy, but started calling him Lin, the one with tasty cakes. But Lin didn't stop there. Every evening he wrote meticulous notes. How much he sold today, which flavor sold best, who complimented, who criticized. In that crumpled notebook he didn't just record numbers. He recorded dreams, efforts, each sigh, and the quiet smile when a stranger returned to buy his cake a second time. One day, as Lin walked home after the market, he passed a narrow dike where he could see the whole sky dyed red at sunset. A soft breeze brushed his face, whispering in his ear, "What if this path only brings you here? Why not try turning in a different direction?" He stood still for a long while. His heart beat faster. A strange feeling crept in. No longer satisfied with the cakes sold at the village market, with polite compliments, with the spare change saved day by day, he wanted more, not out of greed, but because he knew he could be more. That night, Lin opened his notebook, flipped to the very first page. At the top was the line he had written the day he first started learning how to bake. "If I can't be the best, at least, let me be the one who tries the hardest." And in that moment Lin knew his real life was only just beginning. Lin's story might seem to revolve around cakes and a small village market, but inside him, another current was rising with each passing day. It was no longer a vague dream, but a clear aspiration. He had to step out into the world beyond. During his market trips, Lin started paying attention to people who passed through the village. Once it was a group of university students doing volunteer work. They spoke a kind of English Lin barely understood, but the way they laughed, the way they confidently introduced themselves, the way they asked for directions so openly, it made Lin feel something very clearly. He had never truly lived. That evening, Lin dug out his old-school notebooks. He spent hours looking up basic English words, pronouncing each syllable using a dusty app on his cracked phone screen. He mumbled simple sentences to himself, jotted down present tense, past tense, and even the grammar structures that had made many villagers give up after just a few lessons. There were no classes, no teachers, only Lin, a flickering oil lamp, and the chirping of crickets from the fields outside. But strangely, he didn't feel lonely. Each new word, each sentence he pronounced correctly after many mistakes, felt like a small step toward the world he had always dreamed of. And whenever the cakes came out of the oven, he would sneak in a few more minutes to study, his mouth still chewing a fragrant piece of cake. Lin began to change, not just in the way he learned but in the way he lived. He started recording his own voice to practice pronunciation, writing short dialogues to improve his reflexes. Whenever strangers visited the village, if they spoke English, Lin would try to start a conversation, even just with a few simple phrases. "Hello. How are you today?" Or "Do you like this cake?" First they were surprised, then they smiled, and then they said, "Your English is good." That short compliment to Lin was worth more than money. One time, a Canadian tourist stopped by to buy Lin's cakes. After chatting for a bit, she asked if she could share his story on social media. Lin awkwardly declined because he wasn't used to being online. But a few days later she came back, smiling brightly, and showed Lin her phone. On the screen was a short video of Lin, smiling, introducing his cakes in English. The video had reached thousands of views. "People love your story, Lin," she said. "They say you're very brave." He couldn't believe it. He, a countryside boy who had never left his village, could actually make people feel inspired. That day Lin went home, opened his notebook, and wrote down a new line. "You don't always see the path you're walking, but if you keep going, someone else might see the light you're carrying." That sentence was like a statement, not to boast, but to remind himself, don't stop. Then an unexpected opportunity came. An NGO from the city came to the village to survey vocational training programs for young people. They saw that Lin could speak English and had baking experience, so they offered him a chance to join a 3-month crash course in the city, all expenses covered. Lin's heart felt like it was about to burst. This was an opportunity he had never even dared to dream of. But then Lin's excitement sank. He looked toward the small house, where Grandma Rose was sitting by the fire, doing embroidery. He couldn't leave her behind. She was old, frail. How could she manage on her own? That night, Lin sat beside her, turning his teacup in his hands, his heart in turmoil. "Grandma, if I leave, will you be lonely staying here alone?" She didn't look at Lin, she just quietly smiled. "You know, ever since you were born I've wished one thing, that you wouldn't have to live like I did." Lin's throat tightened, she continued. "I'm old. I've lived here my whole life, but you have strong legs, eyes that know how to dream, and a heart that wants to go out into the world. Don't let me be the reason you miss out on your own life." He didn't say another word. He just rested his head on her shoulder. And for the first time since he was a child, Lin cried, silently without a sound, not out of fear, but because he knew he was about to leave the place that held a piece of his soul. The city at night, streetlights reflected off glass windows, casting Lin's shadow, small and fragile amidst the rush of people. He stood there, hands clutching the straps of his backpack, eyes following the streams of vehicles flashing by like relentless waves. For the first time in his life, Lin left his small village. No more mornings spent dusting flour to make cakes. No more familiar birdsong or Grandma Rose's gentle voice waking him. Everything now felt strange and scary. The dormitory where Lin stayed was a tall building. His roommates were from different provinces. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing. Only Lin fumbled, not knowing where to start. The first class took place the next morning. When the instructor began introducing the course in English, Lin felt like the whole world froze. The words slipped past his ears like wind across a field, fast, cold, leaving nothing behind but confusion. "Is there anyone here who doesn't understand?" the teacher asked. Lin looked around. No one raised their hand. He stayed silent too, not because he understood but because he was afraid. Afraid of being the only one slow or weaker. Afraid of pitiful stares. Afraid of being different. But when the class ended, the teacher walked over, gently patted Lin on the shoulder and smiled. "I saw your eyes. You're trying really hard. Don't give up." Just that one sentence, and Lin felt lighter. He went back to his room, reopened his book, turned on the dictionary app, and looked up word by word. Not fast but steady, not much but enough. Every night, when his roommates were already asleep, Lin kept studying, eyes burning from strain, back aching from long hours sitting. But his heart was warm, because he knew this was the price he had to pay to become a better version of himself. Some nights, Lin stayed up late, rewriting his self-introduction paragraph. At first, it was just a few simple sentences. "My name is Lin. I am from a small village." But after a month, he could write a whole passage about his English learning journey, about Grandma Rose, about the childhood cakes. And then one day, the teacher called him to the front of the class. "Lin, can you share with us a bit about your journey?" His hands trembled, his voice faltered, but the words still came out sincere, simple, without embellishment. "I was born in a small village. We didn't have English teachers. I learned from books, from apps, from dreams. My grandmother, she always told me, go and find your life. So now I'm here." No one laughed. No one shook their head. Only applause, echoing after a brief silence. Lin didn't know what he had just done. But in the eyes of the teacher, of his classmates, he saw recognition. For the first time, Lin felt he truly belonged here. From that moment, he studied like there was no tomorrow. Not just English, but also modern baking skills, machine-based recipes, strict standards of hygiene, ingredients, and professional techniques. Awkward at first, but Lin wasn't afraid to ask, wasn't afraid to make mistakes. Every failure taught him more. Not just about baking, but about himself. One evening, after a practical class, Lin stood in front of the mirror, looking at himself in a pristine white apron. He was no longer the clumsy countryside boy. He saw himself as grown, not because he was skilled, but because he dared to step forward. He remembered his first day in the city, The feeling of loneliness like being swallowed whole. But now Lin had friends, people who didn't mock him for speaking wrong, didn't laugh when he was nervous. They helped, shared, and believed in him. One night he received a message from a classmate. Lin, I really admire you. You work so hard. You inspire me. He read it over and over again, tears falling without him noticing, not just from emotion, but because he had become the person he once dreamed of. From a village boy who knew nothing about the world, Lin had not only gained knowledge, but also inspired others through his simple, honest, and determined journey. And that was just the beginning. That June, the sun in London wasn't harsh, but Lin felt a quiet heat inside his chest. Since he passed the re-exam with impressive scores, he studied harder, matured more, and started being mentioned in class as an example of perseverance. But Lin wasn't satisfied. He knew this was only the beginning. One afternoon, while helping in the class kitchen, Lin was called into the office by the head teacher. Lin, I have some good news, but it's also a challenge. A French bakery called Le Papillon d'Or is recruiting an intern for the summer. They're very famous, extremely hard to get into. They only take one person each year, and I recommended you. He froze. Me, sir. Yes, you're the right one. But listen carefully, they're not like school. It's the real world. Harsh, high pressure. No room for mistakes. One wrong move and you're out. Are you ready? Lin's heart pounded. This opportunity, if it were before, he would have run. But now fear had no place left inside him. I'm ready, sir. The following week, Lin began his first internship ever at a luxurious French bakery in central London. From the moment he stepped inside, he felt the difference in every breath. The space felt like another world. Silent, serious, everything ran like a machine, precise to the second. Every staff member walked fast, spoke little, and their hands never stopped working. On the first day, Lin was only allowed to clean, weigh ingredients, and prep the kitchen. No one said much to him beyond cold nods. He started to feel lost. That night, Lin quietly sat down to write in his journal. He didn't dare call home. Didn't dare tell his mother he was shaking with fear of being fired. Because here, even slicing a cake 1 millimeter off could get you scolded. But Lin didn't give up. On the third day, the French head chef said in thick accented English, "You Vietnam, I need 5 layers of mille-feuille, crisp, precise, no mistakes." Lin clenched his fists. Mille-feuille, crisp, paper-thin, evenly layered was one of the hardest tests. A tiny mistake, and the whole batch fails. He took a deep breath and began. 30 minutes passed. Lin poured all his focus in, remembering every step and technique his school teachers had taught. Each layer rolled, buttered, folded, chilled, rolled again, as precise as math. When he presented the batch on the table, his heart nearly stopped. The chef said nothing, just looked, then nodded slightly. Acceptable. Just that one word, and Lin felt like he had touched Everest's peak. Not because of praise, but because he finally knew he could stand in this world. From that day, Lin was slowly assigned more tasks, making cream cakes, caramel sauce, decorating mousse. Everything required utmost precision. He still made mistakes, but he learned from every one. Each day, Lin's skills sharpened a little more. But small success came with a big challenge. One morning, while preparing a VIP order, a 3-tier wedding cake, Lin accidentally dropped a piece of expensive chocolate decoration. Everyone looked at him, silent, but the chef's gaze was ice cold. "Step out. We'll fix it." He stepped out of the kitchen, frozen in the hallway. Inside, once again the old questions returned. Am I good enough? Do I really belong here? But this time, Lin didn't let it consume him. He stood up, walked back in, and asked to fix the mistake. He didn't cry, didn't run, and that made the chef speak for the first time in a low but honest voice. Mistakes happen, but only the brave fix them. You will stay. That night, Lin went home with flour-covered hands, but a heart full of light. He realized, nowhere is paradise. not even a bakery. But if your heart is warm enough and your hands steady enough, any place can be the start of a dream. And so, Le Papillon d'Or became like a forge, burning and sharpening Lin. After 3 months of internship, he not only learned how to make perfect pastries down to the last detail, but also something deeper. At the highest level, people don't just do a job, they live with it. At the end of the internship, Lin was offered to stay on as a part-time staff. It was an honor, a big step forward, but at the same time, it marked a new phase, the phase of real life. Bills started piling up: rent, food, tuition, travel. Lin couldn't keep living off the little savings from his early days. He took another job at night, washing dishes at an Asian restaurant. He worked from 7 a.m. at the bakery, then rushed to the restaurant from 6 p.m. to nearly midnight. The hands that once made smooth layers of cream now became wrinkled, calloused, and sometimes bleeding. His back ached. His eyes darkened with fatigue. But Lin never complained. He just stayed silent and endured. People began to notice a change in Lin. He smiled less, talked less, and sometimes the light in his eyes seemed to fade. Not because he no longer loved baking, but because he was being torn between two worlds. One side was passion, the kitchen where he could create beautiful things. The other side was harsh reality, the place where he had to survive, where every single pound had to be calculated down to the last penny. There were nights when Lin sat alone in front of an empty fridge, eating leftover cake scraps from work, and cried, not because he was hungry, but because he felt like he was losing the most innocent part of his dream. Baking to Lin was no longer an art, it had become a job, a never-ending routine. He had to finish on time, meet the standards, fulfill the client's requests. No one asked if he was happy, if he was tired, if he still felt joy when holding the whisk. And what broke Lin the most was when one day, the head chef assigned him a task: design a signature dessert for VIP clients. This should have been a precious opportunity, but as he sat in front of the sketchpad, looking at the ingredients laid out before him, Lin suddenly felt empty. No more inspiration, no more ideas, only one sentence kept repeating in his mind: how do I satisfy the clients? How do I not get rejected? He no longer thought about creating something beautiful from the heart. He only thought about pleasing others. That was the most painful moment in Lin's life. He realized that passion could die too, if it was pushed to the edge of exhaustion. And then something happened, the final straw. One night, after working nearly 14 hours of overtime, Lin was walking home when someone snatched his phone. Not only did he lose his belongings, but he was also shoved to the ground, scratched all over. When the police arrived, he simply gave a faint smile and said softly, "I'm fine." But he was not fine. That day, Lin sat alone in the bathroom, warm water running over his scratched face, and cried like he had never cried before. I came here to live a new life, but is this really the life I dreamed of? That question hovered in Lin's mind for weeks afterward. He started avoiding the head chef, refused to make new desserts, and did everything like a machine, until one day the head chef called Lin out to the back of the shop. The man, usually so strict, said something deeply human for the first time. "Lin, I've seen you shine, and now I see you fading. Tell me, what is burning you out?" Lin was silent for a long time, then choked out, "I love baking, but I don't know if I can keep loving it when life keeps hitting me like this." The head chef looked him straight in the eye. Loving something doesn't mean you'll always feel happy. Sometimes love is pain. The real question is, are you still willing to endure that pain? That sentence stabbed deep into Lin's heart. Not to hurt, but to awaken. After that night's conversation with the head chef, Lin didn't respond immediately. He returned to the kitchen as usual, but something inside him had changed. He no longer panicked, nor expected too much from himself. Instead, he chose silence, worked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. He thought he was gradually finding his balance again, but Lin didn't expect that the biggest storm was silently forming. On a Monday morning when the head chef was away, Lin was assigned to lead the dessert team for a major event. For the first time, he was put in charge of a group. Part of him felt joy, part of him worry, but deep down, a bit of pride was reignited. Finally, someone recognizes me, Lin thought. This is the moment to prove myself. He started assigning tasks to the team. Although he didn't have much experience, Lin tried to appear confident and decisive, but because he wanted so badly to show leadership, he dismissed his colleagues' input, especially from Anna, a French girl with extensive experience in mousse cakes. Anna reminded Lin that today would be very hot, and if they didn't account for enough chilling time, their mousse would melt before it was served. Trust me, Lin, she said gently. You need at least 30 more minutes of freezing. But Lin shook his head and gave a faint smile. We don't have time. I'm responsible. Just follow the plan. The result was a disaster. The party took place outdoors, under the scorching summer sun. The mousse was brought out just 5 minutes before serving time, and by the time guests came to get it, the cakes had already collapsed. The cream melted, the texture fell apart, and everything turned into a messy swamp. Whispers spread. One guest frowned and tossed the cake aside. The event manager's face turned pale. Lin stood frozen, heart seemingly stopped. He knew it was too late to fix anything. Right after the party, the head chef returned. The news had reached him in just 15 minutes. Lin was called to the office. There was no yelling. No one slammed the table, just one question. Lin, why did you abandon your team? He couldn't answer. His throat tightened, his face flushed with shame. It's not the mousse that melted, Lin, the head chef sighed. It's your humility. That was one of the most painful yet honest critiques Lin had ever heard. For the first time in his life, he realized he had not just failed due to inexperience but because of pride, for having lost the spirit of learning. That night, Lin didn't go home. He wandered through the streets of London. Beneath the dim yellow lights of Soho, he felt like a lost soul trying to find his way. He sat in a small cafe, ordered a bitter black coffee and began to write. Not an apology letter, but a confession to himself. I let my ego cloud my ability to listen. I forgot that in a kitchen no one is number one. There is only the team, only humility. That letter Lin didn't send to anyone, but it marked the beginning of a true change. The next day, Lin took the initiative to meet Anna. No beating around the bush. No excuses. I was wrong. I should have listened to you. And I'm sorry. Anna looked at him surprised. After a moment she smiled gently. Now you've truly become a real chef, Lin. After that fateful night, Lin was no longer the boy burning with the desire to prove himself at all costs. He returned to the kitchen as a completely different person. Gone was the overconfident gaze. Gone were the defensive reactions to criticism. He became quiet, listened, and learned like someone starting over from scratch. Lin began each day earlier than everyone else. When the clock struck 5, when the kitchen was still cold and the streetlights blurry through the glass, Lin stood before the knife rack, sharpening each blade little by little. Not to be sharper than others, but to refine himself. He took notes on everything. How Anna handled gelatin without leaving residue. How Louis, an Italian chef, balanced the salty-sweet flavors in panna cotta. Even how the dishwashers arranged trays most neatly and efficiently. Each night, Lin returned to his rented room, opened his thick notebook, and recorded everything he had learned. Every failure of the day, every unanswered question. He began to live as the least capable person in the kitchen. And strangely, from that place of humility, Lin began to rise further than ever before. Something interesting happened. When Lin no longer tried to shine, others started to notice him. One day, Anna stopped by the pastry counter while Lin was carefully arranging thin apple slices on a tart tatin. This time, You got the caramel to the right temperature, she smiled. And this layer of apples looks like it's straight out of a cookbook. Lynn didn't say much, just nodded slightly, but inside a small light flickered. Not the pride of before, but a quiet feeling. I'm on the right path, and this time, I'm walking it with the same feet that once stumbled. The head chef noticed Lynn too. One day he assigned him a challenge to remake the same mousse that had once brought him bitter failure. Only this time the chef didn't provide a recipe. He simply said, "Make it your way, but make sure it's not just correct. Make sure it's memorable." Lynn didn't start right away. He spent a week experimenting. Each evening, tiny mousse cups filled his fridge at the rented room. He tasted each one, recorded every adjustment. He sent samples to Anna, to Louis, even to Uncle Thomas, the janitor in the kitchen, someone Lynn had never really paid attention to. Everyone gave feedback, and for the first time, Lynn listened to them all, regardless of rank, age, or skill. A week later, Lynn brought a small mousse cake to the kitchen, but inside it was full of maturity. When the head chef took a bite, he stayed silent for a long moment. Then he smiled and said, "Better than any recipe I've ever given you. Finally, you made it from the heart." That night, Lynn stood alone before the blazing oven. He thought about the road he had traveled, the cuts on his hands, the scoldings, the times he cried alone in the restroom from shame, from helplessness, from wanting to quit. But in the end, all of it helped forge the person he had become today. Not perfect, but genuine. He texted his mom, "I'm still not great, Mom, but today I made the first cake I truly believe it's mine." After that heartfelt mousse cake, the atmosphere in the kitchen quietly shifted. No one said anything, but everyone looked at Lynn differently. No longer with the doubt of the early days, nor the caution reserved for someone too eager to prove himself, but with a quiet, genuine sense of recognition. Then one day, while everyone was busy preparing for a big banquet at the hotel, the head chef called Lynn to his office. The small room, with walls covered in certificates, awards, and photos with legendary chefs. Lynn sat across from the head chef, a strict but fair mentor. On the table was a printed sheet of paper, bearing the logo of a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris. "I once said, if you made another foolish mistake, I'd fire you immediately. But I also said, if you grew up, I'd give you a real opportunity." Lynn looked at the paper. It was a special internship announcement for a restaurant that only selected 3 people from all over Europe each year. And the head chef had nominated Lynn. "Not because you're the best here. You're not yet. But you're the one who's come the furthest from what seemed like the lowest starting point." Lynn's heart pounded. He couldn't believe it. The one who was once seen as the biggest troublemaker in the kitchen was now nominated for a position many could only dream of. But then, Lynn didn't agree right away. He asked, "Sir, do I really deserve this?" The head chef laughed. "No one ever deserves anything right away, but some people earn it because they never stop trying, and you are one of them." That night, Lynn sat again by the old oven, once his punishment corner. Now that flame no longer threatened him like before. It was warm, familiar, like an old friend that had burned away every ounce of arrogance and mistake to help shape the new Lynn. He called his mother, voice trembling. "I got selected, Mom. But what makes me happiest isn't that I get to go to France. It's that I finally learned how to walk the right path. Not for recognition, but so I can believe in myself." Inside Lynn's heart, there wasn't a loud cheer, just a deep feeling. The feeling of someone who had once lost their way, now finding it again. Not because of someone else's light, but thanks to the fire that had once scorched him. Paris, the city of light, the city of dreams, and also where many dreams are broken. Lynn landed at the airport on a cold, rainy morning. No one to greet him, no one waiting, just the sound of honking cars, hurried voices speaking French he hadn't fully mastered. But Lynn was no longer afraid. He was used to being alone, used to starting from below zero, and this time he brought something more precious than anything else: belief in himself. The first week at the 3-star restaurant was pure hell. The pace was triple that of the hotel. No one stopped to tell him what he did wrong. Misplace a piece of fish? No, be careful, just a shout. Get out. Start over. Here, no one knew Lynn had once been a troublemaker in a small hometown kitchen. No one cared how hard he'd tried. They only looked at the present, every vegetable cut, every drop of sauce, every second delayed. And some nights, Lynn sat quietly in the small dorm, his hands numb from the cold, from burns, from exhaustion. But in his heart the old flame never died. One day the restaurant held an internal test, where each intern was free to create a dish. Only one shot to prove themselves. Fail, and the contract ends. Colleagues chose complex dishes, beautifully decorated with rare ingredients. But Lynn chose to redo the old mousse cake, not to prove anything, but to remind himself. Someone who once failed miserably could come back and do better. This time his hands didn't tremble. No more salty tears mixed into the cream. Just balance between sweet and sour, bitter and rich, past and present. The judges tasted it. Silence. A minute later the head chef, the most demanding in all of Paris, stood up and said, "I don't know who you are or where you come from, but in this cake, I see an entire journey behind it. It's not technique that moved me, it's heart." Lynn didn't cry, but deep inside, he knew for the first time in his life, he was no longer chasing a dream. He had become part of it. A few years later, in a small neighborhood in Vietnam, there was a bakery called Fire and Mousse. The owner was a young man. No flashy advertising, no sparkling signs. Yet people came every day not just for the delicious pastries, but because they could feel the belief in every soft cream layer, every bittersweet mousse. Someone asked Lynn, "How do you go from a failure to a successful chef?" Lynn simply smiled. "I'm not the best chef, but I'm the only one who didn't give up, even when everything inside me had once fallen apart." Kunzy Podcast English thanks you for walking the journey with Lynn. From a reckless, arrogant boy crushed in his first kitchen, to someone who matured through scars, regret, and the courage to start again. Maybe you're just like Lynn, confused, lost, making mistakes, even feeling not good enough. But remember, you don't need to be great right away. You just need to not stop. Don't let the fire inside you go out, even if there's only a small flicker, because one day that very flame might light up an entire kitchen, a dream, a life.